everybody, and welcome to Bad Ideas, the show where we look at misfires, mistakes, and miscalculations from all throughout history.
I'm Tony Southcott.
And I'm Albert Berg, and today's episode is brought to you by our featured patron, the Dragon. Thank you, Dragon.
Yes, I don't know what type of dragon you are, but thank you.
Listen, I just read the names that they put in their patron description if they're not dirty. Today's episode is about the CED, which was also known as Selectevision, and I want to shout out to the Gamork on YouTube for suggesting this topic. And this is kind of a rollover of a previous bad idea, Tony, if you want to think about it that way. This is another bad idea about things people tried to do with vinyl. Remember the episode from several years ago about trying to put vinyl in cars before they had cassettes and everything? They decided they were going to make a vinyl player for a vehicle that just had all kinds of problems with it.
Yeah, it was all special formatted and all sorts of weird things, I remember.
Well, this was the next generation of that, Tony. RCA, in 1964, decided that they were going to use vinyl to store video.
What sort of memory can you get on vinyl? Like, how much space?
Well, that's the interesting engineering problem that they had to solve, because the answer is not that much if you're going to use it like you would use a regular vinyl record. However, the idea is not the most insane thing that you might think that it would be. The early days of television actually had some video that was stored on 10-inch records. That's actually some of the first video stored that we have comes from records that were used to store data that was video data. But the process wasn't really practical, so nobody had really pursued the technology any further. But RCA is looking at video. They want to be able to deliver video to the home market, and they think maybe they can crack the nut of squeezing the grooves of a record close enough together to get a video of reasonable length onto a vinyl disc. And again, remember, 1964, there's not a lot of competing technology out there that seems like it could be viable for the home market. So at the time, this is not a bad idea. 1964, to think maybe I can store video on a record, it's not like the worst thing you could try. With the benefit of hindsight, obviously we're going to say, that was stupid. We know better technology is coming around the road eventually. But experimenting with new ways of doing things is just part of how things happen, and I don't fault them for giving this a shot.
Yeah, like if we wouldn't have stuff like VCR and so on if we didn't take a bunch of chances beforehand.
Correct. The problem with this technology is that RCA, they start researching it, but they don't really put that much into it. There's like 4 guys on a team just kind of working away in an office or a laboratory somewhere, trying as hard as they can to get this record to hold as much information as it can. And it takes a long time for 4 guys in a room to squeeze video onto a record. So this technology is developing very, very slowly. In 1978, 8 years after the project had begun, the team finally managed to fit 10 minutes of an episode of Get Smart onto a single side of one of these vinyl discs. Now, that's an impressive achievement for them. It's a big step up from where they started. They start with, like, we got a black and white picture on a record. We got a color picture on a record. And finally, they managed to get an episode of Get Smart. Partway, like half of an episode. And you have both sides, so maybe you can get most of the episode of Get Smart on a record. It's a big breakthrough for them.
I can't wait for my 24-disc set of Gone with the Wind to come in.
That would be a real problem for this technology, Tony, but we'll get there. I do have to point out, though, 1972, as these guys are sort of applauding themselves, patting themselves on the back for managing to get 10 minutes of Get Smart onto one side of a record, another technology has just hit the market, and that's the VHS. Now, in 1972, it's not available for consumers yet, but the VHS does start to make its way into television stations, and at this point in the story, the writing is basically on the wall. Again, we have the benefit of hindsight, but for some reason, RCA decides, no, we've still got this. We've still got a viable shot. We're going to keep very slowly developing this vinyl video technology that we think can be the future of home video. Edgar H. Griffiths is going to come to be the head of RCA in 1975, and Griffiths has a reputation, not necessarily a bad reputation, but a reputation as the kind of guy who's very focused on, is this project profitable right now? Projects that weren't profitable got cut. And Griffiths gains the nickname the Red Queen for his ruthless cutting of anything that wasn't profitable. But for some reason, Griffiths doesn't cut the CED. And this to me is maybe the most odd thing about this story, because I've heard estimates that range between 200 million and 600 million as a cost for the development of this technology. Either one of those numbers is a pretty big number. Now, it's not huge if you win, right? If you do manage to win big in the home video market, 200 million, even 600 million, not an unreasonable investment to make if you're going to recoup that cost. But Griffiths is not the kind of guy who's thinking so far into the future that he's willing to put that kind of money on the line for technology that already has some pretty stiff competition. But for some reason, he doesn't cut the CED. Now, my estimation of this, and I don't have specific evidence of it, is that maybe he's operating under the sunk cost fallacy here. Maybe he looks at, wow, we've already put a lot of time and a lot of money into this stuff. It sure would be a shame to axe it now. But the sunk cost fallacy is a fallacy for a reason. The idea that you've spent a lot of money on something and that means it must be worthwhile and valuable is just wrong. And in 1978, there's another turn in the story, because there's a write-up in Fortune magazine about Griffiths, and it's very positive. They love what he's doing with RCA. They really like his sort of very practical, cost-cutting kind of approach. He's an accountant before he comes to the forefront of RCA, so he's bringing that sensibility into the company. And they say, listen, this guy, pretty good job he's doing with RCA. Yeah, we have this one issue. He really seems to be kind of cautious. We're not sure if he's bullish enough on new technology to really bring RCA into the future.
It's funny because nobody seems to like the bean counter like that much. It's like the guy who wants to have everything responsible, the guy that's trying to like make sure that everything works well. They always seem to get like a bunch of crap from people like that.
Well, again, this is not the most crap. This is not like a hit piece in Fortune. There's just like a paragraph at the end that's like, maybe, going into the future, we're not sure how that's going to be. Griffiths apparently reads this. Again, this is one of those situations where we have something that happens and something that happens after that, and a lot of people have inferred cause and effect here. Maybe it had nothing to do with this, Tony. Maybe it was in the works the whole time. But it seems reasonable to draw a line between this article and Griffiths immediately after its publication announcing that RCA is going to move forward with releasing the CED. It was going to hit shelves in stores and be the next big consumer video technology. It was supposed to release in 1978. It doesn't come out until 1981. And it hits store shelves and basically stays there. RCA had projected that the CED would sell 200,000 units in its first year on the market and be in 30 to 50% of American homes within 10 years.
That's quite the projection. Like, no matter what technology you have, that is quite the projection.
That's a good projection for new technology. 10 years, 50% of everybody is going to have one of these in their home. It was obviously wildly and horrifically wrong. CED might have done that kind of business in the absence of other home video alternatives, but the problem was that VHS tapes had been on the market for almost 10 years by now. Definitely for 5 years they'd been widely popular by people who were into home video stuff. You could record your own VHS, they held more video than the CED did, and you didn't have to flip them over every 60 minutes, which is the final tally of how much a CED could hold. You would get 60 minutes per side on this video record. They were interesting in their form function. They had initially thought that they could design these things to be handled out of the case, just like you would handle a record, where you would just plop it out of its sleeve, put it on the record player, drop the needle, and have your video on the television. But because the grooves were so small and so tightly packed and how much information was on them, even the slightest bit of dust would make these things just go haywire. I watched some videos on YouTube by a man who makes a lot of cool retro tech videos named Techmoan, who, if you're not already checking out, you should, if you're interested in this kind of thing. He played some messed up CED videos, and they just would skip ahead. You would essentially see 30 minutes in 10, because it would just kept jumping and jumping and jumping because of dust that had gotten on the surface of the records.
It sounds like my DVDs that I've had for 15 years.
Yeah, but not as good, I would say. The visuals were worse.
Yeah, definitely. I'm looking at a picture right now, and they had some big movies on it. There's Taxi Driver right here.
Right, so to solve the problem of the dust getting on the record, they actually had these big sleeves that were essentially part of the whole mechanism. You would stick your whole record sleeve up to the front of your CED player, and it would suck the disc out of there and then play it, so you would minimize the amount of dust that would get on there. And I have to say, the form factor is pretty cool. It has the same benefits of the old records and even the old laser discs, in that you have a lot of real estate to put some cool art on, and I would never ever want to play one of these, but they kind of look neat. That's something that we've sort of lost in the digital age, is the giant artwork that you would get on the front of records and laser discs and stuff.
Yeah, it's like a digital gallery just isn't as impressive to look at.
Speaking of Laserdisc, CED also faced competition from them. And there is a little bit of back and forth here, because Laserdisc does sort of get hit a little bit by people not understanding the difference between Laserdisc and CED and thinking, well, these are basically just both videos with discs on them. Why wouldn't I buy the CED? And the CED, for all of its downsides to the other technologies, was cheaper. It was a lot easier to produce a CED player than it was to produce a Laserdisc player or even a VHS player. You have to think, it's sort of second nature to us now to think, well, a VHS, that seems really old. But the way VHS tape is read was actually a relatively revolutionary technology and pretty complicated at the time. CED is just essentially using a scaled up or down, depending on your perspective, version of technology that already existed, with a actual physical head running over the top of an actual physical disc that is sending information to the television. That was a lot cheaper to produce. I looked up the costs of these things. CED came on the market for $500. The VCRs that I was able to source from 1981 were $1,400. So there's a significant cost benefit here, but that's really all they have.
And the people who had already bought VCRs, of course, they're not going to want to switch back over, but it's even then, $1,400 in 1980 money is quite substantial for being able to watch a movie.
And
it's definitely not approachable.
I didn't source the actual VHS tapes at the time. I don't think they were that cheap either. I know that the Laserdiscs, I'm a little bit asymmetrical here because I couldn't find the price for the Laserdisc players and I couldn't find the price for the VHS tapes. But Laserdiscs at the time would cost $100. So
better love the movie.
You really better. Now, it's cool because they could have things like special features, and I think director's commentaries existed way back even then for Laserdiscs, but you needed to be a major cinephile to be dropping $100 in 1981 money to see a movie a couple more times than you saw it in theaters. The interesting thing about the CED was that they actually leaned into their lo-fi, low-tech kind of construction in the marketing. They sort of said, listen, those Laserdiscs, they use like lasers. You don't know what a laser is. You've got records in your home. You know what a record is. We've got records with movies on them now. That VHS stuff, what is it even in that tape? Nobody knows. You just stick that box into your player and it plays? No. Listen, we've got records with video on them. And surprisingly enough, Tony, that didn't really sell people on the idea that you should buy a CED.
It reminds me of like people that I know that still want to have a car without like the manual windows, or want to have the manual windows, because it's like, well, if it's just a crank, it's never going to go out. And it's like, well, it can still go out, but maybe not as fast.
I can understand wanting to have the older stuff as an option, but you shouldn't assume that the lower tech older thing is going to win the day, and CED definitely didn't. It wasn't obvious in 1981 who would win the format wars, but it should have been obvious to RCA that CED was going to lose. CED sold 100,000 units in 1981, which was half of the projected sales that RCA expected to see, and things went downhill from there. The product only lasted 3 years and was discontinued in 1984. When it was announced that CED was discontinued, people did buy a bunch more movies to play on their CED players, which made RCA think, oh, maybe we've still got a moneymaker here with selling these movies. But as soon as they announced that the movies would be available even into the future, that revenue stream dried up as well, and they took a bloodbath on this player. Now, I cannot confirm this definitively, Tony. This is another one of these lines that you can draw, but might not be true. I heard Techmoan say that this technology essentially killed RCA. I don't know what his source for that is, so I'm not going to say that that's the absolute truth, but I will tell you that RCA discontinued the CED in 1984, and in 1985, GE swoops in, buys up RCA, and essentially guts them for parts.
Yeah, I remember seeing, like, in the 90s some commercials for, like, RCA TVs, but I don't even think they made it to the flat screen era.
They're still here. You can still buy an RCA branded tablet. I was just in Walmart and saw an RCA branded HD projector. I would not recommend buying one, Tony.
No. That seems just like the off brand at this point, despite it being a name brand.
It's super weird.
I'm looking at it now, the RCA Voyager and things for tablets. I had no idea that RCA was making tablets.
I bought an RCA tablet on Black Friday once several years ago, and I immediately returned it to the store. It was so bad, it was not worth the like $30 they were selling it for. It was an unpleasant experience to have that tablet in my hands. I do not think that they are anywhere near the technology giant that they used to be.
Yeah, definitely not. And it's interesting because I hadn't heard of this format. I'd heard of Laserdisc, I heard of Betamax, but I had never really heard of this one, because Betamax and VHS were like the two big ones at the time. That's the battle that you talked about that was basically eventually like a DVD versus Laserdisc, or like a Blu-ray versus HD DVD. Like, it didn't even make it into the conversation.
No, and some people, like, there was enough people that bought these where you can kind of still find them. It wasn't a nothing, but it just, it was such a misunderstanding of what the market wanted. And really, you think about, I think the biggest problem was that backwards looking, hey, it's just a record, and everybody's excited about this new stuff that's on tapes, right? Cassettes are huge in the 80s, and video cassettes are coming into their own at this time. Even though they are prohibitively expensive, they're the new thing. And to say, hey, look, we're the vinyl of video, I think just wasn't the right tone to strike, especially as you get further and further into the 80s. The tragic thing is, it's an amazing technological accomplishment.
Yeah, it is pretty cool. Like, I wouldn't have thought that you could get that with, like, a physical needle to make video.
Yeah, they worked really hard on this. I don't think you could get any more video onto a vinyl disc physically than they managed to do. But it's like the old quote that's attributed to Henry Ford, where he said if you asked people what they thought they wanted, they would say a faster horse. But what they really wanted was the car. RCA thought what people wanted was a much better record that could play videos, and they just did not have the vision to see what was possible if you thought beyond that paradigm.
But hey, at least you can go on eBay right now and pick up Return of the Jedi for $10 on CED.
I'm pretty sure you could get the VHS for much cheaper.
Probably.
And it probably wouldn't skip. Now, the visual might be a little bit whatever, but it probably wouldn't jump around if you got a dust speck on your tape. So,
also, the magnetic tape's a little bit better protected.
Anyway, that is all I have to say about the CED. I want to shout out to the Gamork for telling me about it. I actually had heard about it. I'd watched the video from Techmoan. I had watched the video that Techmoan did about this technology several months back, and that's definitely worth taking a look at. He actually takes apart several of these players and shows you what it looks like to play some of these videos. They don't look good. They're not a good looking video. It's on par with VHS as far as quality, but it's not something you can really handle today. And speaking of people submitting ideas, we would love it if you would submit yours. If you have an idea for something that we should cover on the Bad Ideas Show, you can send it to badideasshow@gmail.com, or you can leave it as a comment in one of our YouTube videos, and we will read it eventually. We don't always pick up everybody's idea, but we do appreciate everything that everybody has sent in. We love you guys participating and helping us find interesting things to talk about.
Yep. You can also submit those to our YouTube channel or on our social media at Human Echoes, pretty much on every platform. And we will see you guys next week with more bad ideas.
Bye, guys!